Okay, we're now recording. This is a meeting of the Brookline School Committee Finance Subcommittee and simultaneously a meeting of the full Brookline School Committee. Both meetings were publicly posted and there's a quorum for both bodies. So they are meeting simultaneously. Mariah Nobrega is the chair of the Finance Subcommittee and she will be chairing both meetings. And I'll turn it over to you, Mariah.
Thank you. Welcome to the March 5th, 2025 Finance Subcommittee of the Brookline School Committee, which is a concurrent meeting of the school committee. We have several items on the agenda related to the FY26 budget development. I'm just going to pull up the agenda so I have it for myself handy. So the first thing we're going to do is continued discussion of strategies to increase revenues and contain costs. We have several more questions that have come from the school committee to staff, and we're going to go through those. I'll preview the those questions are apologies as they are what is the level service budget for FY26? And so Susan will walk us through that. And then there was two questions from last week that we did not get the chance to have answers for last week. So that was to provide detail on the $400,000 in proposed services and supplies cuts, and to explain what is the what would be included in the 400,000 that is proposed in cuts to the building department. And then in addition, I believe we have some more detail on the question that we got some answers from last week, but not completely on the out of district transportation. So we'll talk about those. Then, and I'll just preview the rest of this. Then there is a proposed vote on expense reductions and revenue increases based on what was already presented to the committee. We'll pull that up before we do public comment, just so that the public can comment on that as well. But we won't discuss it. Then we'll go to public comment, and then we will do a possible vote on the slate. And if there might be amendments to the slate, there might be, of course, any changes to that, but that way the public has the opportunity to have that before they comment. And that's our plan for this evening. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn.
Brian, can I ask a question on that?
Of course. Go ahead.
Thanks. So I'm not sure that I'm comfortable voting on any cuts before we discuss the FY26 additions. I haven't had a chance to look at them because they were sent at 2:30 and I'm driving now. Will we have a chance to discuss the whatever it was, like $2+ million that was added before we cut?
I think maybe you're confused about what you've received, because there was the slate is the thing that you received like 2 days ago.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what was sent as a level service, and then the +2 million of additions that were put into the budget and itemized just at 2:30.
So I see what you're saying. You're saying you might want to remove some of the things that were the additions.
Right. I mean, I haven't had a chance to look at them, but I'd like to discuss why why we'd be cutting or looking at cutting before we look at what was added.
Sure.
That wasn't just a level service.
And we can talk about all of that at our discussion.
I just want to make sure that we're going to talk about it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
You'll get the chance to do all that talking, and we'll have the chance to, like, I'm thinking the level service question is going to take up quite a bit of time. Andy, and then Stephen.
Yeah, could I just ask a question to clarify? So any vote taken today by the subcommittee would just be a vote to recommend a slate to the full school committee, but it doesn't lock in anything, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Stephen?
Thanks, Mariah. I continue to be confused about the process by which we are getting questions answered from the administration about budget-related questions. We submitted, well, I understand from several school committee meetings ago that we were to submit questions to you, who consolidated them and then submitted them on to PSB.
Mm-hmm.
To date, I don't think they've been answered in any way whatsoever, let alone a comprehensive way. It looks like part of the agenda for this meeting is to answer some of those questions, but not all of those questions. I just want to understand does this meeting attempt to answer some of those questions
Yes.
and then put the rest of those questions on for a later docketed agenda item, perhaps tomorrow? Where are we in this process? And the
So,
reason I'm asking this is because I want to understand what this is in fulfillment of.
so there was something like 19 pages of questions submitted. I tried to distill some of them into that were sort of common themes or big picture questions. You all received the link to that document, and the big picture questions are on that first page. In addition to the questions that came from the initial budget request, there were some additional questions from the committee that came from the first list of the $8 million in cuts. I added those questions as well. So if you go back to that document, you'll see I've noted of the 6 original questions that I boiled from the 19 pages, 2 were answered last week, 2 are proposed, or 3 are proposed for today. We're chipping away at it. Susan, I will let Susan talk about timeline of when she'll be able to get through some of the other stuff, but I believe she was thinking about taking it as an FAQ approach, I'll let Susan answer on sort
Okay,
of the
so so part of
longer.
this meeting will be a discussion of where we are in the process and how questions will be answered.
Well, we're going through that. I mean, this is a meeting where we are answering questions that were in that document. And I think, I'm not sure if we're going to have enough time to sort of talk about when we will exactly answer all of those things, but maybe Susan I don't know if Susan, you're prepared to answer when we would be able to get the answers to the other questions in the document or not. I don't want to put you on the spot though. So, if you're not prepared for that, we can get there.
Thanks, Maria.
Sure.
Happy to provide some insight. So tonight, we're going to address these. Tomorrow, you'll get a list of some of the responses to the FAQ. So we're trying to chunk it. We recognize that you're interested in like really receiving as much information as possible. And so we've kind of course corrected, I guess, since there's so many questions this year. We want to make sure that we have meaningful conversation about what's in there. But there's no way to have meaningful conversations about everything. So we're going to talk about these items tonight. And then we're going to send you a batch of FAQ answers tomorrow with some more information, including class size information that folks have been asking for, both for current year as well as next year's enrollment, using next year's enrollment data. So you'll get that tomorrow. And then we'll just keep chunking them and then sending batches of FAQs out, so that you should be getting some in a regular basis, and we'll just try to give you as much as we can and not wait until we get all of them answered, so you can kind of digest it a little bit at a time. That makes
Okay.
sense. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And so, Mariah, you were saying that the consolidated list has answers on a document right now from what has been responded
The
to?
answers are on our meeting materials pages because all the materials have been presented, but the questions that have been boiled are on that first page of the consolidated list of questions.
The questions, yes, but were you saying that the answers that have been delivered have been consolidated as well?
No, I haven't put like links to the specific materials or anything. We could do that. I've said the dates that they've been answered, but we're also like, I'll say that the level service question is being answered. It was answered like very broadly, or like we're getting the right answer today. I'll say the one you were expecting, I think, today. And then there's some information provided on transportation last week, more provided on transportation this week. So I'll try and do that. But for people who are attending the meetings, and I think you're at last meeting, you'll see like when these answers are coming through. I'm just trying to juggle it all, you know.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it, Mariah.
Yeah, thanks. Carolyn, and then we'll go to Susan for the discussion on level service budget.
Thanks. I have a sort of similar thing I want to say, as Stephen just said, with respect to the process. And I just have to say it, like it's my job to have to say it out loud. So I'm frustrated and perplexed, maybe naive, but I don't think so, about this process, partly because it seems so cumbersome. And I'm not understanding why it's so cumbersome, this process of emailing questions and then things are prepared in writing, which I would imagine is time consuming. What I don't understand is, I'll just take as an example on the level service budget document we just got. stipends, extra comp. The FY26 initial budget request is $1,592,213. Based on the specificity of that number, I can only imagine that somewhere there's a back end. There are inputs that when someone says, what are the stipends? What's the extra comp? That could just be either discussed in dialogue by somebody who has the information in front of them on a computer, or that we could have access to that back-end information. And this process of emailing questions and waiting for a meeting, we waited 3 weeks between full school committee meetings since the budget was presented. Just seems really cumbersome, and I think it's adding to frustration. So that's one statement. I wish that could be done differently. And then just as far as what we do later, in terms of voting, and I guess we'll talk about this later, like, I can see myself being willing to vote on things to take off of the cuts list. For example, raising the materials fee to $8,000, but without the full scope of what's on the table and a balanced budget, I'm not prepared to vote to, I hope that voting to take something off the cut list doesn't imply that I accept the other cuts that are on the thing you sent out the other day.
Well, we'll talk about it because we don't have to do those cuts. It's a proposal and we can have different amendments to votes. Without further ado, any more comments, or can we move to Susan's presentation?
I guess a follow-up to what you just said. So is what you're proposing that we're going to be voting on later this document or specific line items of the document?
My proposal was a slate, and then we can amend the slate. So if you say, I only want to vote for these things, that's fine. We can vote for whatever we can vote for whatever we feel like voting for to recommend to the full committee. So if you want to say, no, I only want to recommend, for example, to remove materials fee or whatever other things you want to, that's fine. We'll have that conversation, but let's do the rest of the presentation so we can get to the fun part, which is the conversation. So go ahead, Susan.
Okay. Betsy, can you put up the level service budget document?
Yeah.
As Betsy is doing that, I thought, it might be important to start off by providing a definition of level service, because as I've heard the term used, it's not used in a consistent way. But there is an actual definition of what level service is. So what level service is the cost of operations that are necessary to maintain the same level of service in the next fiscal year that we're providing to students in this fiscal year. So as we all know, we've had this conversation that enrollments change. And so we're not going to provide the same, we're going to provide the same level of services to the student population in 26 as we would for the students in 25. So I just want to make sure, because I have heard people say things like refer to level services being level funded, and level funded just simply means that you're funding at the same level as the prior year. So they're two different things, and I just want to make sure before I walk through this that people understand what that definition is, to provide context for the information that's before you. So first I'm going to just kind of walk through the columns.
Before you do, Susan, Betsy,
Yes.
can you make it so that we can see the bottom of the document too? It's important, I think, the whole thing fit on the page.
Let me.
Sorry.
Mhm.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Susan.
Okay, can everybody see it?
I think a little bit bigger.
Let me make it full
And
page. Give me one
Betsy
sec.
to do
While you
full
go ahead.
screen.
Yeah, I'll do that right now.
Thank you.
I think you can keep going at the same time, Susan, if you like.
Okay. All right, so in the first column is the FY25 budget. So the question is, how much does the budget grow from 25 to the 26 budget if we're just providing a level service program. No enhancements, in other words, no new things. So the next column, which is number 3, that is just simply the difference, right? The difference between 25 and 26. The next column that that's in the table is what are the new requests? And then if we can talk through that. I gave you a sheet that ties out to each one of these lines, these accounts, so you can then drill down and see what is included in the $940,569 in professional staff that's new. And then the last column of the table is just the initial budget. So the initial budget is what was in your budget book. So the first column and the last column are information that's in your budget book, and the middle columns are information about level service and what's new. So I just thought that, I can give you the level service budget, but then I knew that you would ask me, so then what's new? So I figured I tried to do it in this way. I know that it's a lot of information. I know it's taken a little while for us to collapse and combine this in a way that's digestible. So hopefully this is helpful to you. So as we go through, and I'm not sure what is most helpful, so let me just share the documents that kind of are part of this level service presentation. One is just this table here, and we can talk about the lines that are there. There's a second document that are the budget drivers. I saw a lot of questions about what's driving the budget, and the level service budget, what components. People said that they had some confusion about like what's structural, what in the FY25 budget. As we know, we're overspent in a number of categories. And so as we approach FY26, we have to account for the costs that are in 25 that are now being funded through one-time resources and/or that we have cut back on spending or frozen positions and such that in FY26 are then available for full funding. So I wanted to, I thought as I was reading through the questions and listening at the meetings that that was of high interest to most of you. And so the second document are the drivers of the level service budget. Also included in the pack is a list of what is new. And by account, as I said, and in detail. And then the last document that was sent to you is the special education transportation, and folks wanted to better understand what's driving, the increase there. As most of you know, last year we had a big increase to that line, and then we went out to bid and we got much better pricing, which then drove that down. And so why is the number up again? I think that's really the the question that's in the front of people's minds. So Diane's here with us this evening, and she's going to walk you through special education transportation and what's behind the numbers, and what's kind of driving those increases. So you can see that. So those are the 4 components of the information that I have for tonight, and I want to make sure that I spend a proper amount of time for each of you to understand the information. Of course, I'm sure you'll have follow-up questions, and that's fine too. And then the last thing I want to say, just in terms of context, is that, and I didn't have time to finish this piece of it, but I'm going through each line that you see here, and I'm going to give you notes about what the increase is related to, because when you do it by line, it's not the same as like, what are the budget drivers, right? The budget drivers influence many of the lines, right? And so I'm trying to give it to you in as many views as I can, not to confuse you, but I know that all learners, start to process information, and one format will resonate with somebody and another format will resonate with someone else. So I hope that you find this information helpful. So with all of that in mind, I can walk through the numbers. Of course, the level service budget, all in is $10,886 and no, $10,886,571. And we can look at the budget drivers for that. I'm not sure if you want me to just pause and let people maybe
Susan,
ask.
I think it would be helpful if you give the story of what this is telling us, you know?
I think the budget drivers, that's why I
What
meant,
I was gonna say, Susan, is that I'm gonna ask the committee to let you go, unless you have a question which is like clarifying because you didn't hear something right or something like that. Let's let Susan go through and talk about the budget drivers document, which ties to column 3 here. She's got the new request, which ties to column 5 here, and let's let her talk through those things and get to the end of it, and then we can ask our questions. So Jesse, if your hand is a clarification, that's fine, but if it's not a clarification, then let's hold any questions until Susan has been able to sort of, as Helen has said, tell the story of all the different content that you're seeing here.
I guess my question is that regardless of which budget drivers we're told, I'm struggling with the 10,886,000 because it's greater than the $8 million that we thought we had a gap in the last meeting. And so I'm wondering how it's possible.
8 million is a net,
net.
10 million doesn't include the increased revenues.
Well, proposed revenues. Right? It's
So-
level service. So, I mean, wouldn't we just be getting the same revenue we got this year to cover something? Or are we saying?
Revenues aren't the same thing. So the town is giving us revenues which have nothing to do with the level service budget.
that's right. So if you look in your budget document, and this number perhaps will ring a bell, our budget itself has increased by $13,146,998. That's what our expense side budget has increased by. Okay, and so if you add the level service budget to the enhancements,
Right.
that the increase is $13,146,998, okay? That doesn't mean that's what we're cutting. But when you ask to do a level service budget, that's different than how much money our budget gap is. Those are two different numbers.
Susan, why don't you go ahead and continue with the presentation of the drivers that's based on the detail of column 3, and then we can.
Did everybody understand? First of all, I just want to make sure, I don't want to leave. Does everybody understand that the budget increased by 13 million? But the gap is 8.2 million because we got additional revenue.
I think we
Jesse, I
understand.
think that, right, can I just, Jesse, I think to clarify what you're asking, it would be like a $5 million gap if we did level services. Is that accurate, Susan?
What would the gap be if we applied the revenue? Is that what you're asking? Yeah, so
Yes.
$2
Yes.
million less.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. $2 million less than the 8 million.
$2 million less than the 8 million. Is that what you just said, Susan? So
Right.
6.
Right, so if you take out, and I want to make sure I'm answering the question. So the gap right now is 8.2 million, and it includes all the new things. If we take out the new things, which totals in column 5, right? Which
Yeah.
is 2,260,000, we take that out, then the gap then goes down by that amount. But
Right,
there are
it'd be like
things,
6 million then. Okay, I see. It'd be 6
Okay.
million then.
yeah. If you took out everything new, but there's reasons for some of the new, including your literacy program and other things.
That's not,
Yeah.
everything has, well, Susan, honestly, everything has a reason.
Yeah, I'm just,
So,
Hold
I
on, let's
mean-
let Susan go
Yeah.
through the presentation and we can have
Sure.
discussion afterwards. So go ahead, Susan.
okay. So Betsy, if you could bring up the next document, which is level versus 25, and the budget drivers. If we can make that a little bit bigger, that'd be great. Okay. I know.
Yes. And scroll down a smidge.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I tried to give you as much information as I could, I heard that, you wanted a little more detail than we provided in the budget driver document on page 17 of the budget. So, again, first of all, this is level service now, versus the FY25 budget. And the question I'm answering here is, what is causing the budget to increase so dramatically from 25 to the FY26 level service budget? And much of this we've talked about, but I understand that it's hard, if you're not sitting here every day doing this work, that pulling the parts together of presentations from the past may not obviously be at the forefront of your mind. So there's a couple of things I've tried to do. One is to reference back when and where we started talking about these things, so that you maybe that will help trigger some some of our prior conversations for you. So when I developed the forecast for the staffing component, I took the base of, base costs from 25 all in, and I applied 2.75% and said, if everybody in the school district got 2.75% on their base, then it would, the cost of that would be $3,255,971. So that's for all employees. The next line is, and so again, that's for the same staff, right? Because we've taken out the staff that are new. If we look at employee raises that are not COLA, so that would be like step, lane, the principal's adjustment, longevity, all of those other, those kind of forms of compensation. Then steps would be 1,887,771. The lanes 165. You can read across. You recall that in January we had a conversation about a principal's adjustment, and I put 65,000 in the budget for that. Based on the vote that you took at that time. So all in, so for all those like salary related raise adjustments that are not COLA, that is what the impact is. These costs that are in those two lines, we would call and we refer to as breathing costs. And so you could anticipate that next year, those costs will be a little higher than this. Now, there'll be some variation because how many people are putting in for lane movement varies from year to year. And until I have been here for more than a year preparing this information, I can't say yet what your trend is in that area. So shall I continue, or?
Carolyn has a question. Is that a clarification question, Carolyn?
It is.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, Susan. So on the employee raises, presumably that's not unit A and unit B. You're talking about unaligned.
Everybody, non-aligned, AFSCME, everybody.
What I want to know is how much of this 3,255,971 is discretionary, because aren't unit A and unit B raises built into the contract? I don't understand why it's expressed this way.
Can we hold on? That's a question that I think we can come to once we get all the way through. So keep going, Susan. It's a good question, but let's just hold it till we get to the end of the presentation.
So then I read and I heard from you, you want to really understand what is structural. What do we mean when we say structural? That means there are expenses in the current year that are really unfunded in general, right? I mean, we're finding ways to fund them, but we would consider them to be expenses in this year for which we did not include in the budget when you had adopted it last year, okay? And so extra compensation, we talked about this at our meeting in, I think it was in November, in November. And I walked you through a document that had extra comp broken up into a variety of different categories. Some were like our summer programs, Some are different forms of compensation that staff receive because of maybe a position they hold. It can be a differential depending on what your role is. So for example, if a custodian works nights, then they get a differential. If certain paras work in a particular type of a role, they get a differential. So extra comp can be those types of things. Extra comp would also be, subbing and other expenses. So I don't want to walk through what we walked through then, but at that time when we had done the analysis, we had identified $730,660 in these forms of extra compensation and stipends that were not included in the FY25 budget. Okay. On the grants, we have a variety of grants. We've talked a whole heck of a lot about the IDEA grants and how when the budget was developed in FY25, there was a spending plan. And as you can see, here in 26, we have a spending plan, and it includes allocating expenses to all of our grants and recurring revolving funds. And to make sure that we have funding for all aspects of our educational program that enable us to deliver quality learning experiences for kids. So we've talked a lot about the grants. There are other grants besides the IDEA that are kind of rolling back expenses into the operating budget that we haven't had a chance to talk about, but I had put some information in the back of the budget here on pages 88 to 94. And I know that's not what we're going to do tonight, but we can walk through the grants and revolving funds so that you better understand that. Because if we have the same amount of revenue, of course, but our expenses are going up. So for example, teachers or paras that are charged to the grant, if they get a raise, and as we know they do, then it takes more money in order to be able to pay for those additional costs, and or you have to reduce the number of expenses to that special revenue fund. So you either raise revenue or you have to change your expenses. So in this case, a couple that we hadn't talked about that are really are causing some additional increases from grants are the SEL grants. So on the finance committee, you'll remember that a few months ago, and I should have looked it up, but I don't remember which month it was, but it was this fall. We had talked about an SEL grant, and it was a grant that had been in place, I guess, for a couple of years. Unfortunately, we didn't get it. However, there's expenses in the grants that were pretty essential to the work we're doing, and or the work had been completed. And so we've had those expenses. So some of the expenses from that SEL. So I can give you an example on the non-salary side. Included in that expense, my understanding was Naviance, which is the software program we use for in the area of guidance. And so it's not an expense we can do without, because it's pretty essential to our core operations. So that's an example. So there was Title I. There was a health grant that we got less money for, but we still have the expense. So in other words, I think you understand. And so SEL. So it's those grants along with the IDEA that this grant component accounts for about 1.8 million. We've talked about this in a variety of meetings. So that's the impact. And again, whatever the costs are in 25, they're more in 26, right? So whatever the costs were that we've been talking about in 25, as we roll forward to 26, are greater. So it's going to cost your structural deficit in 25 is going to be greater in 26. So this accounts for all of that. On the salary structural deficit, there's a new staff component. We've talked about this. If you go back to our new position PCN report that I provide you every month, you'll notice that there are a number of positions that target special revenue funds. Those were one-time funding sources for those positions. And so, you know, in FY26, we, you know, we still have the expenses, we still have the need. And so those costs roll forward. So I call those structural, right? They weren't in the 25 budget, but they're for services that are being delivered to students in 25 that we have to pay for. And then there's some minor, you know, salary adjustments. So late, you know, LOA return information came in, and step in lane after I had done the, you know, analysis before we published, that came in. And then I had also talked to you about breakage before. So those are the components. So those would be like this on the salary side, what's driving these costs. These don't happen every year. And they you know, it's uncommon to have this many items be unfunded. But as you know, FY24 was underfunded as well. And so we've been in the process of trying to catch up. I believe that this budget before you catches you up, right? It includes everything that we know of right here, right now. Okay, so that's the salary side. If we go to what are the drivers on the non-salary side, and we've talked, you know, about this as well. We've talked about this at finance committee meetings, both last year and this year. You know, though we attempted to address the issue last year by increasing these non-salary lines in OSS by over 20%, it wasn't adequate. And that, you know, I can't explain that. OSS will have to, you know, kind of give you the deep dive into, you know, what is really causing that. And I understand, you know, that, you know, if we have the same number of students or close to that, then it begs the question, so why do we have a $1.2 million for the same number of students? And that is a question that I don't have the data to be able to analyze it and answer that. But our OSS team at some point, you know, will be able to provide you with more details on that. And then settlements is the same thing. We saw this last year. The deputy, you know, had lowered the amount in this line during the budget process, and the settlements are higher than what was anticipated. And so now these are settlements in this year. These aren't new settlements for next year. But in fact, they're settlements that have been agreed to this year, causing pressure on our current year budget and our obligations for those students in the upcoming year. Transportation, we can drill down into this. You know, I'm going to let Diane do that, but we sent you out a worksheet so we can kind of dive into what is causing the $696,000 increase when we attempted to capture it last year. And so I'm going to have Diane walk you through that. And then as you can see, if you look in the back, there's, you know, some additional increases to on online services, books and subscriptions. Some of this has to do with contracts. So when we look at professional technical services and the online books, subscriptions and tools, and this relates directly to the conversations we've been having around contracts, you know, and having adequate funding for that. And then all of the other non-salary lines in combination increases to them. So this is for, you know, your increase in your regular ed transportation contracts and your, you know, all of the other services that we have that are non-salary account for the $461,719. So the majority of the 4 million or the 3,065,000 in the non-salary side is being driven by those OSS costs that we have been discussing. And again, this is in FY26 dollars, not in FY25 dollars. So the combination of the two, you know, so the salary drivers, the non-salary drivers together account for that 10,886,571 that it was in, I think it was column 3 or 4 of the table 3. Thank you. So that is, those are the drivers. That is why we are, you know, here, you know, so some of it is related to employee raises. Some of it is related to a variety of different types of structural deficits that have been identified in this year, some creeping up from 24 that were not captured in 24, but existed. That's why we had to go for a reserve fund transfer, if you recall. And that was after tapping some of these one-time revenues, right? When you tap the one-time revenues, the problem is in the next year, you still have the expense. So we're being pinched by that. Yeah, so that's that.
Hang on one second, Susan. Andy,
Sure.
is this a clarification?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So thanks, Susan. Yeah, my question is kind of to try to check my understanding of what you've been just presenting. So I believe you're saying that everything labeled here as structural, that means the projection forward into fiscal 26 of money that we're spending in fiscal 25, but was not budgeted in fiscal 25.
Correct.
Okay, and if you add up all of those items on this slide that are labeled as structural, it comes to over $5 million. So that actually seems to account for the vast majority of the fiscal 26 budget gap that we are trying to close now.
Correct.
Okay, so so what I've been saying makes sense. I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding sort of the implications of what you just presented.
Yes.
Okay.
And then on top of that, the other big driver, of course, is your raises.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And then there's the other, smaller amounts, but they're really not,
They're not
I mean, they're
driving.
important,
Yeah.
important, but not significant, right?
Okay, thank you.
Val, assuming this is also just a clarification.
It is. I want to clarify the deficit on grants. I understand you saying that SEL and Title I are going to go down from FY25, but my understanding is we don't project the money we're getting from IDA to go down in 26. Is that correct?
That's correct. But
Okay.
the shifts in the positions that we had been talking about are coming, have to come back on the operating budget. And we're having to deal with that using one-time revenue sources in 25 that we're not going to have in 25 and in 26. And so we have to account for that. But yes, that's,
Thanks.
yep.
Carolyn?
Sorry, my question was the same essentially as Val's.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, why don't we go on to, are you going to present the new items now, Susan? Is that your plan?
Yeah, we can, or since we're right here, before we go to that, because that's on a different column, can I have Diane show you and talk about the special education transportation
Sure.
piece, since it's related
Let's
to
go quickly because we're at 5:45 already. So I want to make
Yep.
sure that we go a little faster through all these things so we have enough time. This is really important. I just don't want us to overspend time on it, given everything on the agenda.
Yep. So Betsy, if you could bring up the document for special education transportation, and then I'll turn that over to Diane to walk you through.
Right. Good evening, everybody. Special education, there are a number of cost drivers. Transportation costs around the country are going up. Driver shortages are driving the costs up for everyone in both regular and special education. And if you look from 23 to 24, our numbers of riders went up, but our costs went up phenomenally. And we were not in Brookline isolated in this problem. Everybody in Massachusetts, and in fact nationally, has been dealing with the same problem. When we went out to bid in 25, we got better pricing, and that was great, and that helped us stabilize into 26, but our numbers continue to go up. And as long as your numbers go up, your price is going to go up. And looking forward to 26, our price is going up because in the contract that we signed for, we have pricing for 25, 25, 26, 27 with regular contract increases each year. So not only are the numbers going up, but there are regular contract increases built into our contract with our vendor. We're doing our very best to maximize capacity in the vans. We try to put as many kids in the van as we safely can. Safety first and making sure the kids have a good experience. But when we can, we want to make sure that we're not running half-empty vans to the best we can. And I know the director of facilities and transportation is, meets regularly with the vendor every Friday. And they go over the routing and do all that they can, because obviously it's not in the vendor's interest to reduce the number of runs, but it is in our interest. So they talk about that frequently. Questions?
Stephen?
Thanks. Diane, can I ask you for a level of detail here?
Sure.
So going from FY 25 to 26,
Mhm.
you have the same number of OOD students, right? That we're projecting?
Well, actually, our numbers are projected to go up a bit. We have some kids that have not yet gone out of district that are projected to be going out of district.
So what's the number difference?
4.
Okay. So the transportation dollar difference is 700K. So can you
Well,
break that?
it's not just the 4 kids, it's also the contract increase from one year to the next.
I understand. I understand. Can you help break that down for us a bit more to help us understand what exactly that transportation difference is?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
There's a $700,000 difference between the 2 school years, right? In transportation costs for out of district students.
Million and 25 was 3.7 million budgeted. What are you talking about? I'm lost too.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I don't understand your question
On
either.
your first slide, it said transportation costs for out of district students. The difference was 700K. Is that not correct?
Oh, that's from budget. I mean, if you look at the budget to budget, but if you look at the year-to-date actuals, you can see we're spending far more than budget this year.
I see. So what are we actually spending this year?
That's this number. No, you can't see my
Yeah,
cursor.
I can see your mouse.
Yeah, right there. That's what we're spending. That's what we're on track to.
I
that's
see.
what
So
we
the
spent
actual
this year to date.
delta is closer to there's very little change projected.
Correct, from what we're actually spending this year, because the numbers have gone up so much.
Okay. So then my question is more about the change in actuals. Can you help us understand the difference between what we initially projected and what we're actually spending? Can you break that down for us a bit further?
Sure. In district, we were projecting 70 students, and now we're moving 99.
I see. So that's
the
very
principal
significant.
driver.
Okay. Thank you.
Carolyn?
Thanks. Thanks.
Wait, I'm sorry. And can I just really quickly, and I'm assuming that's going to account for the bulk of the tuition increases as well.
Well, not necessarily. In-district transportation isn't coupled to out-of-district tuition.
Right, but that change in numbers that was not projected surely is tied to the change in tuition costs. Isn't that a fair
The
assumption?
out-of-district change is tied to some of the change in out-of-district tuition costs.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one question, or Carolyn's first?
Mariah, you're breaking up, by the way.
Am I? Shoot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Helen. I've already asked a few questions. I do have a question, but you go ahead.
Yeah, I just, a clarification. What is Foster RSC Transportation?
RSC is the name of our vendor.
Yeah,
And the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education asks for us to track our expenses for foster care, McKinney-Vento homeless, and special education separately. So that's why you see the 3 lines. But it's all the same vendor.
So foster care was budgeted at 436, but only came in at 106. Is that correct?
So far this year.
So far, because we're at half point. So it would be, but there still might be some savings there if we're at half.
There may.
Okay.
or there may not. Foster is one of those really volatile. Foster and
Right,
McKinney-Vento.
it can happen at any time during the year, and we are responsible for the transportation if they move out of town?
If McKinney-Vento, if they move out of town and choose to remain schooled here, we're responsible for half.
Mhm.
And if foster care, depending on what's decided as their home domicile district, then we can be fully responsible.
Okay, thank you.
I think
That's-
it's important for people to understand too, like if you look at FY23, there were 2 students and the cost was 216,000 for that transportation for 2 students. So when
Wow.
people are understanding, I mean, there's a lot of costs that the district is responsible for, and to Diane's point, it's extremely volatile because it depends where they, where their foster placement is and everything else, how costly that is, and it varies a lot. Thank
No.
you, Diane, for this. Oh, go ahead if you want to add anything else, and then I think we'll keep going.
The whole point of the foster and the McKinney-Vento is to, as much as possible, stabilize the lives of the children and to allow them to maintain their educational stability. Since their home life has limited stability, we want them to have their school life have some stability. So it is a lot of money, but that's the thinking behind it.
Yes. It's very important for that reason. Carolyn, go ahead and then we'll keep going after that.
Do super quick. This is a yes or no. I assume it's yes. The ESY is mandated.
It is.
And just jumping back to the level service budget to the regular transportation line, it looks like the increase is comparable to the out of district. Is it what accounts it super briefly for the 1,047,000 increase in transportation?
There are 3 factors in that line, I believe. One of them is simply a bookkeeping change of moving 300,000 from professional and technical services over to that line because it was miscoded last year. That's for athletics transportation. Am I right, Susan?
Correct.
And do you want to take the rest of that line?
Yeah, so the increase in regular education, transportation, the contractual increase is very small. And
And I believe the rest of it is special ed.
yeah,
Sorry, I'm looking at the line on the level service budget, transportation, which is distinct.
Yep.
I think from I'm sorry, out of district tuition. That's
Yeah.
my bad. Thank you.
yeah. So
Okay.
there's 3 components to transfer, actually kind of 4 components that roll up into transportation at the highest level. And so it's athletics, it's out of student services, and regular education transportation. There's also been a shift. Again, most of our accounting has been cleaned up. As I said to you last year, it'll take 3 years to kind of get everything, clean and hitting in the right account codes. But we've made great progress. And so another small adjustment is in the K-8. We had a transportation line in the current year. And that should have been in the field trip line. It's only $2,000, but even though those are small amounts, we really want to have integrity with the data that's being charged to each account. And as I said to you last year, as we were going through this consolidation process and correction process that has been ongoing challenge in Brookline for 20 years, that it would take us a couple of years to get everything just completely clean. But we're in good shape. There's a few of these accounting adjustments, and we'll try to call them out so that you understand where those lie.
Do we want to carry on to new requests and column 5? There we go.
Sure. So I'll tell you how it's organized. Maybe I can start and say, this is a document that's was created by the entire administration. This isn't something that, though oftentimes I'm presenting information, it's not that it's my information. So I just want to make sure that people understand that principals participate in this process, directors, coordinators, and so even when you're looking at the budget reductions, it's not, I want to be clear, it is not town hall sitting here just making these independently. So anyways, the new requests, I've organized it again. The first column is, what cost center, this expense is related to, and then what program. So OSS is a compilation of special education, nursing, guidance services, etc. In this case, I'm just going to walk you through the first line just to make sure that you understand how this is set up. And then the account. So you could see on the documents we've been looking at, it's set up by account codes, right? So we've named what account code. And then, we named whatever the specific item was so that you wouldn't have to wonder, where that information was provided by the budget manager. And then the cost, what that new cost was, and then the implications. We tried to provide you with a little bit more context. So in this case, this 2,500 provides training on changing special education mandates for special education administrators. So it's a new ask for the upcoming year. It's $2,500, and that is where it's charged. So so when you look through the list, you can, read through what those new items are. And then the total for education, training, and conferences is 49,008. If you look at the level service document, the first table that we looked at, you'll see this number there under enhancements for new educational training and conferences. The next category is new general supplies. And so this is a list of what is new as opposed to what, was funded in FY25. And legal services. As you know, we've talked about this, that there's two components to the increase in legal services. We wanted to add additional resources for the contract negotiations that will take place in FY26. We're not negotiating with the teachers union this year. And we tried to estimate based on what we saw was your costs were in prior negotiations, what that might be. So we increased that by 110. And then with the transition of the new deputy superintendent and OSS, we increased the amount of money for legal as with all these contract settlements and agreements that are being made now and or have been made in the past, that having access to somebody that can provide guidance and maybe some interpretation about those contracts and agreement would be helpful. So that was 160,000 there. We've talked a bit about athletics at the last meeting. And so there's some new.
Susan, I want us to be conscientious of time and maybe not go through every line of this, because I think that will take a long time. I'm willing to be overridden by the committee, but I'm just thinking, okay, that this is okay to keep going. Can I ask one clarification question? If you were to go to, for example, line 2, the explanation here, to what extent are the explanations meaningful still? Because the second one there says the comment, this is valuable but not mission critical. So I'm presuming this was an initial comment that was made in this process, but like, if it's not mission critical, why is it in here? I guess is my question. Has there been subsequent, like, is this an initial comment and there's been subsequent conversations that have clarified that some of these things really should have made it in, or?
No, it's a great question. So I'll speak to that one in particular. So we have 3 new operations staff members
But I guess I don't want you to speak to it in particular. I want to understand generally, because there's multiple places where people have said like, this would be great, but we don't need it. So I guess I'm just wondering,
what
was the decision process that made, I'm assuming that some new requests were denied. Is that correct?
Yeah, this wasn't, yeah. So we presented you with the all-in budget, right? The initial ask. There wasn't any trimming that took place.
Oh.
We talked, pretty, throughout the process about making sure that we captured all of the costs. These are the things that were new, right? And valuable, because we have a new strategic plan that was adopted last year. And we wanted, and we thought you were asking us to provide you with information about, how do we deliver on that new strategic plan? So if we cut these things out, then there would be no knowledge that these are things that would, be important as we move forward. Also, with the override coming before us next year, having the committee be familiar with some of what these items were, we thought would be enormously beneficial as we approached our budget development season this year, in service to the strategic plan, the new SIPs that the principals put forward. I mean, you had asked that we make sure that we fund these, so that was the idea behind the development of this budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
Al, do you have a clarification?
Yeah, I want to make sure I heard what I just heard. There was nothing on the wish list from anybody that was there was a no to. So what we got was the wish list of everybody?
We didn't ask them to do a wish list because you remember when we kicked off the budget process, we knew that there was a huge structural deficit. So we asked people to put forward what it was that they needed. Some things you can need, but may not be mission critical and essential. In other words, we've talked about this, so you can postpone training. It doesn't mean it's not important. So that was the thinking behind it, that if when we met with staff, we were really clear that for anything we add, there's going to have to be a subtract. So let's be very conscientious when we put this budget request together to make sure that we can connect this to like SIPs and the strategic plan or some kind of a need that has arisen that we couldn't identify before. So that was the way that we presented the budget development process and what we've followed throughout.
Thank you, Stephen.
Mhm.
Hi, I'm sorry. I just want to follow up on what Val just said, Susan. So this budget was this document is an all-in document that represents the vision of excellence that the principals helped come up with.
Yes.
And the 8.2 projected gap that was initially presented to us included all of these asks.
Correct.
Okay, so I think the reason why I want to make sure I understand that is because when we were initially presented with a round of proposed potential cuts, they didn't include rolling back some of the things that are marked here as potentially not mission critical. So that seems like a process mistake or oversight. I just that's
Well, I'm
why
not sure, Stephen, we know that they don't, because
that's
they
not
could be,
true.
for example, in the 400,000 in service and supplies cuts that
right.
we
So
are going to talk about
that's what
next.
I'd love for clarification.
Yeah, I think
So
we'll get to
do
that
some
next.
of those things, are they included in things like
Yes.
supplies? Great.
Yes.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah. And not only that, some of the new positions are being reduced, right? But if you don't know we have the need, especially when we're coming up with the override, I mean, the ELE need is real. Although we can't fund it, if we never mentioned it, then we'd never have a conversation about that, right? And so, but as you know, in the
I got it.
proposal,
I just want to make
Yeah,
sure that
okay.
some of this is represented in the proposed cuts as well. That's really the clarification that I'm
Okay.
looking for. So let me let you go on with this now.
Yep,
Okay, well, I think we're not going to go through this in detail. I think people can look
Okay.
at that. I think the next thing on our agenda is to go to the 400,000, if I'm not mistaken, in the reduction.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, look, there's that same thing I just asked about on the second line here.
yes,
Okay.
exactly.
I swear this was not a setup.
No,
Nope.
no. Yeah, so I can't even, it's so small. Is there any way to make it a little bit bigger? I know you like them in PDF, so that you can have a clear document if you expand it. So thank you. Okay, so you had asked for a list of what the $400,000 in reductions to the supplies and services lines are. And so that's what that $400,000 represents in cuts. Some of these are new. And what we tried to do over in the farm, so let me walk you through again. It's cost center, it's program. So within A&F, we have finance and operations, human resources, data and IT and human resources, and then the account that we're cutting. And this is really important because when you go through this process, I want a tie directly to various line items. And this is kind of how I crosswalk it. And then, so the cut of the 25,250 and is for this budget and financial data sync tool that we think would improve efficiency and our ability to provide data in a with a quicker turnaround. And then our data systems would sync up, which they don't right now. So a lot of work we have to do is take from one system and take from another system and put them together in Excel, which is clunky. And so the idea here, and this, is consistent with our goal of efficiency, which is in our strategic
Susan,
plan.
I think that for the interest of time, we can't go through these lines. I'm going to ask that if the committee has specific questions about lines, they can ask them, but otherwise we'll scan it and then we'll keep going.
Okay.
So
Okay.
why don't we take a minute or two of quiet time and people can just speak up and raise, like they can just, don't worry to be raising or to
Mariah,
be called on. Yeah.
can I amend your suggestion to
Sure.
say if there is a place where these supplies represent some of the asks that were in some of the previous documents, like non-mission critical, that are in there to be rolled back, I would love for that to be highlighted, for instance.
You're talking about like the second line that I just highlighted, the one that was the.
Yes, or if there are multiple examples of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I tried to do that for you where it says, so that's what I just wanted to go to the last, I wasn't going to go through line by line. I was just trying to use that first as an example of what information is in each. And then the last column is type. And it was there, I said, this is an enhancement, which means that you would have seen it on the other document. If it says a service reduction, it means it was in the level service budget. Okay. And so if it was in the level service budget, we're reducing it. And so what's the implication? It was put in because it relates to the strategic plan. And then in the comments section, the thinking behind reducing it. So just so you understand, I was trying to make that crosswalk because not everything that's in the enhancement or in the new request is part of this reduction.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's how I tried to lay it out for you. So you'd have that crosswalk.
Are there other specific questions from the committee on some of the details that they see here? Jesse, go ahead.
One question about the NEASC, which is.
Jesse has his hand up first, and let me go to him and then we'll go to you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jesse.
What page of the budget book has the supplies? I mean, it's 400,000, sort of hard to compare it against anything unless we know what it was before. Is it in the budget book on a certain page, supplies and services, or is this a potpourri?
It isn't. That's why I tried to
I
give you.
was looking everywhere for it. So how does this what the 400,000 seems to be things like maybe we don't need it or we'll take a cut because we have to. What percent or portion, based on your knowledge, Susan, then is this of what could be reduced? Is it 400,000 of 800,000 or 400,000 of $4 million?
Well, when we had put forward the reductions, like how would we close the gap of the 8.2 million? This is what the type of thing that we were thinking we would be reducing. So that's all. We have looked at other lines and other accounts. We will be bringing forward some additional items tomorrow night that will cover other lines besides supplies and services. So this is just supplies and services, Jesse, but I would like to answer your question. So I did put the page numbers, and so, I mean, it would take me a little bit of time to go through, but I could do that. What I tried to do is say it's in the cost center. So if you went to the Office of Administration and Finance, I'm just using the first one, so you want to know how to connect the dots.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm just saying it's a finance-related expense, what program? Okay, and then if you look under online services, subscription and tools I don't know what page it is off the top of my head.
24.
Okay? Right, you're going to see an increase there, right? And so what I'm saying for the Office of
Yes.
Administration's Finance is we would cut $25,000 for this particular tool out of that line. That's how we
Right,
try
but I
to,
mean, the problem I'm having with this is that the 400's arbitrary. It just happens to be the sum of a small list of things people are temporarily agreeable with to remove. if
Jesse,
put-
can we hold the discussion until the end? That
Fine.
gets to a comment and not a clarification. So I'll
Okay.
pause that bit for it because we've got other people wanting to comment. Helen, do you have a clarification?
Maybe not.
Okay, Sarah?
Is there an easy way to know if the OTL line items are mostly K to 8 and not high school? Or is that something I should ask later?
The easy answer, Sarah, is they're mostly K to 8.
Okay, thank you.
now, I do want to speak to one thing though. We've bucketed it into cuts, right? So the high school has a $500,000 cut that they're gonna present. Do you see what I'm saying? So what we're trying to do here is say that related to supplies and services, we recognize when we put the budget forward to you, that there are some things that we could reduce.
Yep. And my question was a clarification question only and not a commentary, because we'll do the commentary later.
Okay,
I totally hear you.
yeah.
And I think Jesse's question, I'm going to frame it in terms of a clarification is,
Sure.
like, why is it 400,000 and not 400? Like, it seems like the decision was made by the dollar amount and not by the actual content of the cuts. And so why isn't it, 413,000 and 456? Because that represents actual things as opposed to a round number. But that's, I think.
Well, the cut isn't a round number. The cut is a little higher. It's 411,000 something or another, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect. I mean, yeah, in
Yeah.
the scope of what we're discussing, 411 is like 400, right, Susan? My question is, what the clarification is, number one, if I hadn't asked you that question, I would go through this budget book back and forth for 3 or 4 hours to try to find each line item and then go back and see, well, what was the change? What did they decide upon? What did they pull out? It makes it extremely time consuming for like each school committee member to do that if they're so inclined. And the second thing was, even once I do that, it would still not be, I wouldn't know what proportion of what could be done is I'm looking at. I'm only looking at like a swipe here. That was my question. I know what you're saying, Mariah, about it seemed too even. That's okay. But even if it came out at 652,000, what is that of what could be done? Because it's nowhere close to where we need to be. I mean, I think we'll all agree.
We were never going to take it all out of supplies, but let's pause this for
Correct,
now
exactly.
and keep going on the next question, which is, I think we're through supplies and services. It's the building department.
Okay. You want me to speak to
Go ahead.
this?
Yep.
So just to sort of give a context for this, first of all, I would like to make sure that people know that we appreciate immensely the work that's done by Charlie and his team. They do yeoman's work of keeping our buildings running well, getting us through COVID, all sorts of things. So this is no reflection, this cut from what they are asking is no reflection on what they do. And it's more just looking at the numbers and trying to figure out where we could do some savings. And this, obviously we want to do non-student facing savings. This is one of them. So if you, what I did was go through what Charlie had presented to us at the Capital Subcommittee meeting. And as you can see, and this is sort of a shorthand, there are graphs, spreadsheets for all of this. The FY24 budget was estimated, was budgeted at 3.6 million and 3.4 million was expended. So 181,000 was returned to the town. In FY25, through January 17th of this year, we've spent approximately 1.2 million of the 3.6 million that was budgeted for FY25. FY26, there's a proposal for 3.7 million. I'm rounding up here, so to just be quick, which is an increase of 162,000 over FY25. So the proposed savings of 400,000 that was put forward would basically be not doing the increase over last year. Since the year before monies were returned, we don't know exactly what will happen this year, but assuming that, you know, what people don't see here is from FY23 to 24, there was a significant increase in the building department budget. So I'm suggesting, and I think the staff is suggesting, because I followed up on the 400,000 that they were proposing, of 162,000 level funded building maintenance budget, level funded to FY25, and 238,000 reduction because the FY26 gas budget that I looked at that was given to us, the actuals for this year, we've only spent 162,000 of it, a $1 million budget for FY25. So therefore, it would seem to me that let's assume we triple the 162,000, it still doesn't get us to 1 million. So therefore, taking 238,000 of that makes sense. Is that clear? Jesse, you have your hand up.
His hand is from before, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right.
Any questions on this proposal? The details of the 400,000, Carolyn, go ahead.
Yeah, so what would be in the 162, Helen, that wouldn't get done? And I also have a question about, I see reducing gas budget, but is FY25 covering electricity currently to date?
Yes. I mean, we have you have that slide, right? Somebody?
Should be Betsy on the third one, I think. Or the second one. Here you go.
So here, I brought these numbers here so that everybody can be on the same page. If you look at FY25 to date, and this is from Charlie, these numbers, the original budget was 2.2 for electricity. We've expended 1.1. There's an account balance of 1.124. If you look back the year before, now remember, Driscoll, Charlie has told us we have saved in 1 month $30,000 in electrical because of the geothermal. So I'm assuming that's why he, hold on, yeah, only increased that budget by 43,000 for 26. So there's the electrical budget. We're not touching that. What I looked at more was the gas budget, what was expended through January 17th. Now, I'm assuming, you know, maybe there's a couple months that aren't included, whatever it is. I think considering we only have 2 more months to go, I think it would be hard to get to the million. And if you look the year before,
I'm sorry, Helen, can I just cut to the chase on this? Are you just aligning projections with actuals?
No.
Then I don't understand.
Because the actuals, the projections, we don't have actual projections, but even Helen's point, even if we were to triple the amount expended through the middle of January, we would still have a huge balance in the gas account. So she's proposing to reduce it to about 800,000 for next year.
And I think what we
based on our actual spend this year.
Right, based on our actual, but we're not aligning it. We're not like shaving off everything that we don't think. There would still be a huge cushion within the gas account.
Okay, but we're significantly reducing our projected spend here based on the fact that our actuals to date this year and in previous years, Helen, or just this year?
This year.
Is there a
don't-
longer trend line than this year?
I think I
Or is
do
this year
have it,
sufficient?
but I don't have it here. I don't think I prepared that, and I should have.
Part of
I'm
it's
just-
tricky too, Stephen, because Driscoll went on to,
I see. I see. What
whatchamacallit,
is there a way to prorate based on the other schools? I'm just wondering if this spend to date per school year is sufficient for us to make a projection change, or whether we need to look at a longer set of data points. I obviously defer to you,
Well,
Helen, and to Charlie
So,
on.
yeah, no, it's a good question, and I have that data, and I'm sorry, I should have included it. There are other areas that, it's not clear to me, such as Charlie has been trying for 3 years to get HVAC technicians. He says if he can hire 3, he can save us $300,000. Now, I didn't take that one because we don't have them. Are
Okay.
they double counted there? Maybe. So, I don't think we.
I'm just asking because
Charlie-
I'm wondering about the relevance of the data points to projected gas prices. This is obviously not my field. I'm
Right.
just wondering what the methodology is for what we're doing with our projections, although I really appreciate the effort to find savings here.
Right. And I think what we're doing is saying, this is what we think, Charlie. If there's another way you want to do that 400,000, we don't usually direct his spending. You know what I mean? So he will use his best judgment for what's necessary in this.
I think there will have to actually be a budget, and I think the next step is probably going back to Charlie Simmons and Charlie Young to sort of get their stamp of approval on this approach. And that will hopefully answer your question, Carolyn, too, as to, if there's any impact, if level funding his his repair and maintenance budget, does he feel there'll be a significant impact or not?
Okay.
Any other questions on this one?
What's that?
Any more questions on this?
So the 400,000 was just a number. The 162 in, I don't know if you're assuming it's work, I guess, projects is just, I don't know who came up with the 400.
Well, that was the increase based on the fact that in
Okay.
181,000 was returned in FY24. We can't know what will be returned this year, but there was monies returned. So we took less.
Where did the original 400,000 amount come from?
Well,
There
that's what
was-
I'm telling her.
Okay.
This is a little bit different, I think. You're explaining where the 162 came from.
Thank you. I'm good. This is
Okay.
fine now.
We're gonna go to public comment in a moment. Before we do, Betsy, do you mind toggling over to the spreadsheet that I sent the committee earlier this week and making it a lot bigger? I just want to show this to people before they have public comment. This is not a vote yet. This is a proposal which I have made. The red things, can you make it a little bigger, Betsy? And maybe just make it so they can see the expense portion, particularly the expense line, because that's I think what people will be reacting to. Thank you. So the proposal is to accept the cuts that you see in green, to pause or, to defer any decision on the cuts you see in white, and to not accept the cuts that you see in red. So scratching out, in case you can't read them, not accepting the raise of the materials fee, not accepting pausing of sports in middle school, not accepting the halves of the instructional aids, not accepting the pause in the summer programming like Project Discovery, and not accepting the performing arts programs. And other than that, they are mostly accepted. I will say there's a couple changes. You can see that for the transportation, there was a proposal there to both reduce native language support program busing and also reinstate the SOBRO fees. And they would not accept the agreement, or not accept the South Brookline fees. It would only reduce a fraction of the costs at the high school. There would be new expansions to programming at the high school will be removed, but we would continue the funding for unified bocce to complete the annual cycle of unified sports that was promised in the override, and it would retain funding for gymnastics, which is a current programming. And then I would just highlight that the last line, the high school, that cut has been reduced from 500,000 to 250,000. But that is already something. But again, those would be that's the proposal, and we can now go to public comment, and people are welcome to comment on this or comment on any other thing they wanted to go to talk about, and then we will return to committee conversation and other questions. Carolyn, I'll make sure we go back to your question as well about the COLA question. So Lauren, go ahead.
Lauren, you should be able to unmute now.
Yes, I just did. Thank you,
Okay,
Betsy. Hi, Lauren Bernard, former town meeting member and commissioner for Park and Recreation. I can't read this very well, the slide that you just put up there. I'm not able to read it super well, but from what I can glean here, thank you. I was curious about a couple of things. So this proposal, this is sort of a big picture question. So the big picture question is, and comment is, I mean, it seems to me that you have to have these sorts of lists, but to make any sort of firm decisions before the audit is completed and the results of the audit are known, seems to me to be very premature. And my other comment is, I know we're not supposed to ask questions, but I'm confused. I'm sure other people are, what a food service hybrid model would be. Does that mean cutting staff but not products? Does it mean having certain people working and not others? And then for Sunset BA and CE, it says BAC is working on a proposal for school committee. So are we still talking about just gutting the funding for that? Seems like pretty low amount, $24,000. Doesn't really do much. And I'm concerned. I can't see if I don't see it in here. Is the custodial reduction in here? Oh yeah, here it is, TBD. It says $1 million if I can read it correctly. I would just like to point out, and I'm sure other people will point this out tomorrow, that from what we understand from the meeting with AFSCME yesterday, it's by March 20th, custodial personnel and food service personnel are going to know whether they have jobs or not, which again is in before the audit is completed and the report made. I would like to point to the safety issues that this brings up. These are custodians are in the building with children during the school day, after the school day, and they are known. We know they are quarried. If we start going to, outside companies, for-profit companies, we don't know what their safety system is. And I shudder to think that my 20 quarries went through, I don't know, I had to submit them 3 times before they got reviewed. That
Lauren, just a reminder, we have a time limit on comments. I should have mentioned that before. If you can wrap up.
I'll finish up with this thought. It seems to me we need to get a lot of HR processes right before we have to start thinking about processing queries for, hundreds of outside company employees. But I just, the safety issue is really bothersome, not knowing who's going to be in the building with children and that could rotate on a regular basis, let alone the ethical question of, having to lay off, all of these people. But that aside, just safety. Anyway, thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Lauren. Tal, go ahead. Just a reminder too of the time limit.
Okay, so I'm going to try and keep it short. I'm not going to comment on your thing because I just saw it. I know you're getting a lot of what not to cut. I'm going to talk about 3 things I propose to cut. one of them is out of district. I think that somebody should look very carefully at how and whether these students can be served better in district, because it could be penny wise, pound foolish to send them out of district. We can control in district. We cannot control out of district. It could be a win all around. It takes the right person to really look at this. I think this needs studying. The second thing is I'm shocked there's $1 million for computer leases. I don't know why every kid, I don't know if it starts at K or 3 or whatever, gets a laptop. In the high school, every family has the option of buying their own or getting a school one. That should be implemented throughout. I would much rather and happily buy my kids a computer than use a school one. The last one is I'm now going to touch the third rail. It's the Office of Educational Equity. So I did a little exercise. I went and looked at MCAS scores over the last 3 years, so post-pandemic, 22 to 24. What has happened is that Black and Hispanic students actually fell behind an additional 0.5%. This is significant on the MCAS scores across the board, 3 to 10, in those last 2 years. And so my question is, what is our return on investment on this office? I know there's more staff diversity, but that should be handled, that could be handled by HR. Our mission statement is not to have an Office of Educational Equity. Our mission statement is more equity for students, all students achieving. And if this experiment that we had is not working, it's not helping students achieve, then we don't have the funds in lean times to spend money on experiments. If that money were to be taken and put to starting the calculus project in earlier grades, I guarantee you will see return on investment in a year. So I am really, really concerned about the return on investment on something that is so expensive and whether it's actually fulfilling the mission that it's supposed to, which is helping our students. That's it. That's my comment. I'll also email to you the sheet that I made.
Thank you, Tel. Kevin?
Hi, my name is Kevin McKenzie. I'm a teacher at the Lawrence School. I'm speaking in support of, I just want to share my support for actually maintaining specialist curriculum coordinators in, at the very least, 6th through 8th grade, but universally K to 8. I myself am specialized a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade generalist who is responsible for all of the core academic subjects and also presumably world language if that position is going to be cut. Is mind-boggling to me. It's going to be incredibly inefficient. My coordinator has brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars to this district through grants, reconnecting us with critical programming like Facing History at a time when we clearly need it. I also want to speak to my deep concerns about privatization efforts proposed before you. Our custodians and food service workers are union. They are ASME union. And I'm also very concerned that the cuts to food service workers especially would be impacting one of the town's most diverse workforces. This is largely a workforce of working mothers and women of color, and taking away good union jobs from them with benefits, privatizing them just so that in several years, when we can no longer do it in-house, the people we contract to, when history indicates that has not gone well, can then shaft us when it comes time to raise the contracts and break those costs back up to essentially what was pre-privatization, if not higher, without any of the retention of that staff or any of those benefits of having that done in-house. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kevin. Jen?
Hi, thank you for all the detail on this. My name is Jen Donatelli, and I'm a parent of student at Hayes and an active member of the community there. The comment that I have is twofold. The first is, for the items that we have in the red versus green versus white, it's hard to understand the criteria that's being used to make the keep versus cut decision on what gets kept. And some of the items that are still in green is recommended budget cuts. I think one of the most important criterias I would consider this group to see is the impact to student outcomes, as we all have I think a shared commitment to minimize impacts to negative student outcomes. And there's 3 or 4 of these on here that I think may have a material impact that are still in white and green, such as the teacher specialist counselor caseloads, the 1.2 million effect there, math specialists, new position reductions puts increased pressure on teachers, and could have a significant impact to the student outcomes in FY26. I think that's a really important consideration to take in as we think of the red and green and where we land. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Just a clarification for anyone looking at this. The white ones are not being just proposed for, at least by me for now. So the white lines see in this column that is where they're all adding up. The second column, they're not in that consideration. So that's why you see no dollar amount there. Go ahead, Justin.
Sorry, I was unmuting. Justin Abramson, I'm a Lawrence parent. I wanted to hit on something Tal said and covered a little more. Well, one thing is technology has increased a lot since 23. It's tripled up to almost $2 million. And that's subscription, software, licenses, and things. It would be great to see a closer look at that. I saw some things get trimmed, but they were pretty small numbers against that large number, and I don't really understand the cause of the increase. And again, the $1 million in leases, that at a $500 computer, that's like 2,000 computers a year. You could buy 2,000 new computers and throw them in the bin every year for that amount of money. So I'm a little baffled by how large that number is. And then I think the last piece I had comment on around that was was also we seem to have increased staffing a lot in the last 5 years while we've had enrollment decreasing. Enrollments decreased 10% and been flat. Staff jumped 20% total staffing. It would behoove us to look closer at that. I just don't understand why. And also this out of district, it seems to be spiraling, and we still don't have a clear explanation of what's driving the costs. We don't know the drivers of the drivers, so to speak. And I'd really love to see someone shine some sunlight on that and really show us what exactly is increasing, an analysis across the spectrum of what is going on with the tuition, what is going on with the transportation. Are certain types of transportation more expensive than others? So we really break it down and try to figure out how to get a handle on that. We just know it's going up and we keep paying for it. We don't seem to know why. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Britt?
Thanks for giving us a chance to speak. I'll be quick. As we continue to go through this process, and it's a hard one, so I appreciate all of your thoughtfulness and time. I hope that we can narrow in when we talk about details, particularly around like student facing and non-student facing staff. The non-student facing staff that I saw presented at the last finance subcommittee meeting is a very broad bucket, including people who are in schools and people who are not in schools. So as the conversation continues, parsing that and getting into the details, I hope is something we can do. Same goes for our custodial FTE. Like, I know my building is hybrid, so we have seen CleanCo come in, and when we need things that we are seeing in CleanCo to happen differently, it is our in-house custodians who we go to help us manage that communication. So it's unclear watching if $1 million is all of our custodians or some of our custodians. And so it's hard to think about the impact on students in our buildings if we don't quite have a grasp of what that size is. Appreciate the time. Thanks.
Thank you, Britt. Are there other public comments? Okay, we will go now to committee discussion and questions. Carolyn, do you want to go back to the question that you had on the drivers? And you were asking, I think, about the staff. You asked about the 2.75% on the.
I did, yeah.
Susan, you're still here. Yes. Sorry, there's so many little squares. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, I don't understand what that first line of the cost drivers is, but I suppose I can ask the question as, what is the cost of discretionary raises for FY26?
Betsy, do you mind pulling up the drivers document?
Sure, yep.
Thank you. Just so we're all looking at the same line.
Yep. Is this the right one?
Yeah. So you're asking of the 3.255 million in that first line, Carolyn, how much of that is discretionary versus contractual?
Correct.
So I would have to go back and calculate that, but because there's, let me just be sure that I understand. So would that just be any contracts that the school committee has signed, sealed, and delivered on would be considered not discretionary? And then all other contracts that have not been agreed to by the school committee would be non-discretionary?
You
Is that
know,
how you're
the
defining
way
it?
that I understand your request for clarification, this kind of goes to a piece of information that I've been asking for since December, which should be par for the course information provided to school committees as well as the public, which is a comprehensive org chart and salaries. So it makes it very difficult to understand sort of where the money's going in terms of raises without that information. So we've never even been able to have this conversation before. So I suppose signed, sealed, and delivered. I don't know what the process is of discretionary raises. I do know that we have Unit A and Unit B contracts that have raises baked in. So that's not even up for discussion. I guess what I'm asking for is, what is the number that in the universe of things that are possible would be on the table to not be spent as part of raises for FY 26?
So like Susan, maybe another way of asking it is, do you know the number for units A, B, C, and AFSMI to carve out of that bigger number?
Yeah, where I'm struggling with it, Val, is that AFSMI has not been settled. That's why I'm asking the question. Right? AFSMI has not been settled. You don't have contracts for raises, COLA raises for them.
Okay.
So what is
And
the
that's
aggregate, what is the aggregate salary increase that is not mandated by a contract
That's what I was
today?
asking. So I just want to be clear. I'm not trying to be difficult, because if I give you a number, then, and it doesn't include what you're hoping for, then you get upset. So I just want to make sure. So what I'm saying is that who you have contracts for right now that are in place, that are agreed upon between the school committee and the labor unions, is Unit A, B, and C.
Mhm.
You do not have agreements with AFSMI for increases for FY 25 or 26. Okay, so I set aside money in the FY 25 budget and in the FY 26 budget for AFSMI and non-aligned. I can tell you tonight what the non-aligned amount is, but I have to go back and I'll have to parse out if what you're asking for is anything you haven't agreed to, and I'm happy to do it. I just want to make sure when I do it, then that is what you're asking.
I think I'm asking for non-aligned.
that.
I appreciate the clarification because I am not doing
Non-aligned.
your job. I don't have all of the nomenclature, and apologize for any naivete on my part, but I'm trying to understand of what costs we have control over, were we to say, and not that anybody wants to say it, and I'm not proposing to say it, but in the world of possibility, were we to say, hey, can someone take one for the team this year so we don't have to lay off teachers? What would that save us? Something in that universe is what I'm trying to get at and have been trying to get at for a couple months. Thanks.
Susan, is that something you can provide? When do you think you'd be able to provide that split?
I can give you non-aligned, which is what she's asking for. It doesn't seem like, see, I would say non-aligned and AFSMI contracts are in parity. But I'm
Okay,
not sure
so
that there's
so
consensus on
when
that.
can you provide that?
I can work on that, tomorrow.
Could you
Okay.
just give us the non-aligned right now? Because I assume we're gonna
207,
settle.
yeah,
Okay,
200, yeah, 275.
great, thank you.
Helen?
So I just want to provide a little context for why Susan, I think, has included everybody in those employee raises. What we have done over time is usually give the non-aligned the same as the union gets. It's just been, it seems fair to do that way. And that's sort of been forever since I've been on the school committee. So that's the context.
Of course, that makes complete sense. The question is, if we're tightening belts in the world of possibilities of belt tightening, what could we tighten our belts on that would not put us in breach of
And I
contract?
think you heard 200,000.
What did we hear? Sorry, 275,000.
We can't hear somebody.
Mariah was just repeating the figure, but you did cut out, Mariah.
I thought we heard 275,000, not 200,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Can I try to say what I understand the main story from this meeting to be, and can you correct me if I get it wrong, Susan?
Certainly try.
Okay. This is my takeaway from this slide. If you include revenue back in this slide, the level funded budget with revenue suggests that there was about 2.2 million in additional requests from the administration, and there was about $6 million in what are structural cost drivers that produced the initial $8.2 million budget gap that came to the school committee. Is that right? I'm really boiling stuff down, but I just want to make sure I got some big picture stuff right.
I guess you could frame it that way. I haven't really thought about it that way because in addition to that, you'd have the salary. So I guess mathematically.
So
too, I have to think it's an interesting way to frame it. So
right. I feel like I made you very uncomfortable by saying it that way. Am I miss?
No,
You're
no,
still
you
breaking
did.
up.
I'm breaking up.
No, Mariah was.
Oh, okay.
The reason I'm asking is because I'm also trying to get in my head what the implications of this slide are for the previous override and what it suggests it should have been. I know we can always get it more right in retrospect, but it suggests to me that the cost drivers that are salary related, those are structural, those we can't touch. Well, really, a lot of this we can't touch anything having to do with FAPE either. Everything other than the 2.2, this is all level funded. We can't touch any of this. So it's the 6 million really that, knowing what we know now, should have been part of the override request. That would have gotten us to the place we need to be now. Is that what this presentation should be leading us to the understanding? Is that a correct understanding in your view, Susan?
Like I said, I haven't thought about it in those terms, and I wasn't here for your override, so I don't
I
know
know.
what dial
Wasn't
was.
your
but yeah.
responsibility to get us to the right number of the override.
Yeah. So I would say that I would agree with your statement, Stephen, that I don't think everything was included in your override.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really all I wanted to
Yeah.
say out loud. I'm just trying to wrestle with the big picture of what I can conclude from your presentation.
Yeah, and I think Mariah had said that there were limitations put on what you could ask for the override. I think I heard.
Putting aside the politics of what was and wasn't possible,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand what structural factors are driving our budget gap or the proposed budget gap, and what is part of the request that we think would drive excellence in Brookline that we are going to have to wrestle with in making the decisions to close the budget gap now. Okay.
Can I make a comment on that before? Can you hear me
Yeah.
better now? I
Yeah, I
finally
can.
accepted my fate and put on my headphones. Okay. So before we get to you, Helen, I think that I'm going to put aside the whole conversation about the earlier override, but I'm just going to say that we just heard more or less from Susan that even if we put even if all of the unaligned employees were not given any raises, we would still be at just around $5 million in breathing costs. And in a world where $5 million in breathing costs is compared to $4 million that we're getting from the town increase in year-on-year revenue, not to mention the increase in out of district costs that are we're following a substantially different rate of increase than other increases. We were going to be underwater, right? And if you take this and go back several years, to your point, you know, there's just not a lot that it makes it like we couldn't have done much differently, because this is like these are sort of the arcs of change with the budget. I think that you were mentioning, Stephen, level service budget, but really there are drivers here. We can choose to provide a lower level of service, but that's the option that's going to be in front of us in some places, right? Because we can't afford a same service budget. So I'm just like, you're like, well, we can't cut these things. Well, we can. We're just going to have a lower level of service, and that's going to be the choices that we're going to have to make.
But this list doesn't include lots of stuff that we do pay for. So I don't fully understand the logic there, and I actually don't want to, I'm not trying to get into a debate with you, but that.
But can you clarify that? What do you mean by this list, which is the drivers? Why would the drivers include everything we pay for? Or maybe you
Well,
can
I thought-
clarify what you meant.
What I understood from what you just said is we can't afford all this stuff because it's on top of, it drives us to be, this is what drives us to be, have a gap from what we want to do and our revenue, except the what we want to do that's not in front of us.
That's my point. That these costs have nothing to do with whether or not we choose. Like, these costs are just the costs of doing the same things. And then that means that we have to make choices about what we don't do, right? Because these costs are sort of just the regular costs. There's not some amazing amount of discretion in here.
Right.
Even if we take out the part that in theory you picked up on, Carolyn, that in theory could be discretionary as opposed to a true level service, like there aren't other things here particularly that are.
Not
And
here,
so,
but this
right,
is
that's
not the whole, what we're doing.
Wait,
this is
you're
the
not hearing that.
change, and this is the change in cost. This is just what FY26 costs more than FY25 to do the same things.
Right.
So the point is, in FY26 we can't do the same things we did in 25. There's not some magical thing in these drivers that is going to let us.
I guess my point is maybe in FY25 and 24 and 23, we were overspending to begin with, not to mention filling the gap with one-time funds, which is not sustainable.
Well, but Carolyn, can I?
Go ahead, Helen.
I think, Carolyn, there are some expenditures that we don't have control over.
I understand that.
The 35% increase in special ed is an increase.
Of course.
You know, and that's a big part of what we're seeing here. You know, the other thing that I was looking at the town projections for our expenditures for 2026, and they projected in 2025 143 million. They're giving us 141 million, 2 million less. You know, I mean, that it may be it's a non-starter, but that's what, you know, you would expect if they would be projecting what was important.
Our overspending is not the town's fault.
I didn't say that. Just like, you know, when the snow budget goes out of control, you know, they get a reserve fund transfer. If our special ed costs, which are required, you know, we're going to be trying to look at some of them, I'm sure, but you know, if they go over, that's not something we can control.
I would also, yeah.
Well, go ahead.
I think another thing too, I mean, the costs are real. You know, these kids have needs, and it's our responsibility to provide them with the services and supports that they need to be able to access their education and advance in their learning. So even when we look at the structural deficit on the salary side under grants, whether it comes out of the grant or the operating budget, there's still real expenses for those students. You know, so it's not just, you know, on the non-salary side that we see these increases, but they're real costs that are required for those kids.
Of
And
course.
and we're not the only ones. We're not the only ones experiencing this.
Susan, I don't
But
think,
we have
Yeah.
to cut something. We
yeah,
have
I don't think any
we
of
have
us
to
are
stop spending
disagreeing
so
on
much
Yeah.
money.
Carolyn, for my part, I don't see it as overspend necessarily. I see it as it's the administration's responsibility to present us with a vision of excellence, and it's the school committee's responsibility to advocate as vigorously as possible for the full funding of that vision of excellence. And it's the town's responsibility to figure out how best to balance that vision of excellence with excellence in other services as well. So I don't see it as overspending, but as the school committee prosecuting our responsibilities as best as possible. And if there need to be compromises made, and we could disagree whether something is excellent or not. I don't need to get on this soapbox. I'm
We're
sorry.
literally
I think
Back
it's
over to you.
important.
We just plugged a 2-point-something million gap in this fiscal year with one-time funds from reserves. So we are literally overspending.
Right,
And we
but
haven't figured it
Carolyn,
out.
the spending choices are being made because of the drivers of special education. So, you know, these are sort of unpredictable things that we're working through and managing.
It's okay. I just want to be clear, and we don't have to complete this conversation now. Let's just make sure that this doesn't sound like Carolyn is questioning special education, because that's not remotely. This stuff is, special education is a given, but they're like, we've all been getting dozens and dozens and dozens of emails from the public, for example, about how heavy we are in central administration and money that is rolled up into some of those positions, some of those activities, some of those offices. So just, and I expect that that is a conversation that's going to continue, but I'm certainly not questioning the real drivers, especially when it's special education.
Why don't we, if it makes sense, as the subcommittee, the full school committee is fine, of course, to continue to chime in. I'm wondering if the school committee, given that we're already almost at 7 o'clock, the subcommittee wants to discuss which, if any, vote that we would like to take. Betsy, do you mind pulling up my spreadsheet?
Yep.
And Carolyn, I heard you say, I think you said that you might feel comfortable voting on the red things, but not some other things. Sarah, I see your hands up, so why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Carolyn, because that question was asked to you, would you like to answer that?
Go ahead. You haven't
Okay.
spoken at all.
So I'm going to answer that question and hope that my colleague Carolyn will come in to back me up. So if we're going to start the conversation with the red lines, I really like the idea of leaving out the instructional aides in first grade. I feel like we have said before that the education that students get early on helps us out with expenses later. And so it seems to be a really good idea. Sorry, I don't know if I can keep on talking because my family is so loud. You can hear me?
We can't hear them at all. Go ahead.
Great, okay. So I think that, you know, when we're thinking about student outcomes, we want to make sure that we get to students early. And so I'm very happy to see that that is one of the red lines. I also feel that same way that math specialists is not on this. I don't want to cut them. I think that our teachers need the support of the math specialists, and they can't do the differentiation that they need to do if they don't have the math specialists. So I'm glad that that's not in our green. That's not green right now. So I thought that I would talk to one of the green lines, but let me actually stop there so that other people can speak to what's red.
Carolyn, do you want to chime in? Or Val?
Yeah, can I speak to what's white?
I'm sorry,
Yes, you,
clarification on what Sarah, you said, what did you say about the first grade pairs? I just wanted to make sure I interpreted what you were.
Yeah, I wasn't speaking very clearly because I have 3 children and they're very loud. So let me try that again. Looking at the red lines here, I'm really happy to see that we're not going to try to cut first grade instructional aides.
Okay.
I think that when we think about expenses and about student outcomes, that we all know, we've said this before together, that if we get to students early, we help them out, and that ultimately saves us money long term. So that seems to be appropriate that it's in the red line. I think that our instructional aides can do a lot in classrooms. Sometimes they can be trained to do even more with small groups and standing in for teachers or being like a co-teacher in many different ways.
Thank you.
Val, go ahead.
Thanks. On the white line of examining teacher, specialist, counselor caseloads, I'm hoping that when we get that presented to us, that it's presented as workload and not just caseload number. So I'm just hoping that Dr. Guillory, whoever's putting that together and presenting that back to us, that there's differentiation made for workload versus just a numeric caseload.
And Val, I think that that's good to sort of define a little bit more, just for the type of information that we'd like to see. Do you mind doing that, or can I step in?
I don't know that either of us should. I think that.
Okay.
Can I ask, I would
ask.
ask Linus. Linus, can you please give us an ETA for, and I think when I requested that information, I think alluded to your point, Val, of, what, like, tell us how you're going to measure what the resulting workload, caseload, whatever this ends up being is going to be. But Linus, can you give us an ETA on when we will have a response to the questions on this one?
I'm hoping within the next few days. I know both Lisa and Karen are looking at this question, and I saw some activity, some discussion in email about it today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So if I could, because it's on the same topic, Stephen, would you mind if I?
Please
Go ahead, Helen.
Thank you. So what I would like to know also on this line item is what we remain with when you take out these 12.9.
I think that was in the question I wrote too. I believe that was, yep, also, yes.
Okay.
Yes, what remains and what is the resulting workload,
And
caseload, et cetera.
And if people remember, this is hard for me to say because I'm a social worker, but we did hire 8 social workers, 1 for each elementary school, back at the end when we got back after COVID, and that was with ARPA money, just to sort of refresh people's memory who may not have been on the committee or were on the committee and weren't necessarily aware of that.
I think
and that leaves still, and what it leaves, there are still social workers at the high school and social workers at the in BEEP, 2 in BEEP and 4 at the high school. Or maybe
Linus and Susan, I believe that the breakdown of the 12.9 was 8 learning center teachers, 4 guidance or social workers, and a 0.9 ETF. Is that correct? Am I remembering correctly the breakdown?
Let me see if I can find that quickly.
Okay. Stephen, go ahead while
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a separate proposal to live alongside of the current proposals. I think there are 2 proposed cuts in here that the administration itself has endorsed, and only 2. One is the new position reduction, which OSS has endorsed as its actual request. Please, Dr. Guillory, correct me if I've misunderstood. This is based on my understanding of your comment from our last school committee meeting, that it represents the actual request from OSS, not the previous one. That the number of FTEs represented in that line represents their actual request for the school year budget.
And they're also doing a little bit of refinement on that right now, Stephen, as well. So we will be getting that tighter.
Okay.
Pretty close.
Okay.
What their ask is.
So I want to suggest.
What was the second one, Stephen? You said there were 2, but okay.
Right. So the second one is the supplies item, which is currently white. It's item 9, the general supplies and services reduction. I want to suggest that the 2 of those proposed cuts be considered with or without further proposed cuts as this committee considers as something we cut.
I think in terms of practice, it's fine that school committee, obviously members also talk about this. I'm just thinking because their process is going to be finance subcommittee is going to recommend something to full school committee, which is fine. Like I think it's okay if your comments sort of inform what the subcommittee does, because it might help us not have the same like we might not waste our time tomorrow if you had to bring that.
Docketed though, can't we just sort of do it since we're also the school?
Because there's other stuff happening tomorrow. So finance subcommittee is recommending this, and then
Sure.
full school committee, and there'll be additional stuff presented tomorrow to school committee, and then school committee can consider those things plus whatever finance does. So
Sounds good, Mariah. Sounds
again,
good.
I think it's helpful if other members help finance refine their thinking. I just want to keep in mind that the end of this,
Absolutely.
finance is hopefully voting to recommend something to full for tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Carolyn and then Sarah.
What I still don't understand about this process, I think I asked this in the beginning, is what your thinking and intention is here, Mariah. I am perfectly comfortable voting to remove some of these cuts that you put in red, but I am not prepared at this time for that to mean that I accept the ones that are in green. Is your thinking that we are voting on red and green, or the red and then the green is still on the table to be considered, weighed against whatever else is brought to us in the coming weeks?
So my thinking was we have an $8.2 million gap, and it would be great to be able to whittle that number down by the end of this week, not close it, but get closer to a number and to make some progress on that front. So that was my goal, and that's why I brought the green things and the red things. One possibility that finance could consider, I'll throw this out there for you all to consider before we hear from Sarah and Val, is to split this into 2 votes, or perhaps more than 2 votes. One could be to consider the red options, whether or not we remove them, and one could be to consider the green options or some subset of things. So that way you could still vote to remove things from consideration, but you could vote 2 different ways, I guess is my point. Does that make sense, Carolyn?
It makes sense. I guess I feel like that is, and I don't mean this as a criticism of you, but, and I have expressed to school committee members, and other school committee members have expressed amongst ourselves frustration with this process. The public has expressed frustration with this process. And I feel like this is sort of part and parcel of that, because I don't know what's on the table. My ideal expectation would have been to be presented with an entirely different and more appropriate set of potential cuts, proposed cuts, 3 weeks ago. And my expectation is that we will have proposed cuts in front of us tomorrow, I guess, from Linus, Susan, whatever the process here is, that I want to weigh against the many things that were proposed 3 weeks ago. So again, I mean, I will happily say raising materials fee tuition to $8,000 is off the table. I'll happily say 11, I agree, off the table. But without knowing what else is on the table, there's no way I can possibly feel prepared to address the full list here. Because it's essentially incomplete.
Understood. And last year we had some of that challenge as well, I think. And we chose not to vote until we had an entire list. But the scale of this year is different, and the time is not different. So, that was my thinking, but I'm willing to, of course, whatever the subcommittee wants, that's what we'll go along with. So Sarah, go ahead, and if you could just talk about this question of what you feel comfortable with voting, I think that would be really helpful.
Right, that's why I raised my hand, was just to talk about it. I do think that it would be premature right now to say, let's definitely not do this tonight. I think that it's good to just start the conversation, because then we can start to weigh our values on this and have some conversation. So I would like for us to hold off a little bit about the decision of how we're going to vote about this, and consider the cuts in front of us and talk about them.
So sorry, I didn't. So you do want to talk about the green ones, or you don't
Yeah, I'd
want
like
to?
to talk, I'd like
Okay.
to start having that conversation later on. If Carolyn still feels that same way, I would be very happy for her to change what we're discussing. But why not, let's take a little bit of time on this
Okay.
and have some initial conversations.
Isn't that what we're doing?
Hold on, Val, go ahead.
I'd like to move to remove the items in red from discussion.
Okay, is there a second? I will second. Carolyn, how do you vote?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Val?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, so there's our first vote. And now the second question is, do we want to consider some? It doesn't have to be what's here. It could be, we could be adding some things. I hear what you're saying, Carolyn, and some of these things feel, and I think Stephen was alluding to this, like a little bit more obvious to me of like, there's like the 991, 274. That's just a right sizing of the ask, right? So I don't feel like there's any problem with that one. And I'll just give it another example. The 70,000 from the town side, I'm trying to differentiate even in my own mind between some of these that are much more straightforward. The 70,000 was an additional position for IT that would just not get funded. So again, that one is much more straightforward. The 90,000 of the reserve fund, that's taking us from 8.5 to 7.5. Again, that's not a real position. So I guess like, you know, is your position, Carolyn, that you are uncomfortable with taking any of these changes? Because even if we could, I'm thinking even if we could chip away at some of this, which might be again over $1 million, it would be great to reduce our deficit from.
No, and I appreciate the question. That's not what I'm just, my real question was, if we vote yes on the red, does that mean we are approving the green?
Oh, right. No. And I think, right, we can split it into as many, but we could take these one at a time. We can do this however we want to do it.
I have a question about sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a question about the beep, and I'm not sure that's got talked about much yet. And maybe it's going to have to be answered down the line. I guess I'd like to understand what the implications of that are. Specifically, like what does that mean? Does this mean beep classes getting larger? And is that presumably whatever's proposed here is allowed for preschool classes? So I don't know if we've got much detail on that. And
Linus?
also,
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. Okay, Linus, can you speak to that?
No, I will say it.
Okay.
Sorry, I will say it because it's kind of in here. Last week, when we had the report on how the current fiscal year deficit was being plugged with reserve funds, $1.2 million of which is coming from BEEP. I know I could find it somewhere, but I don't think we saw the back end of that. I don't know what kind of reserves BEEP has. In the previous FY25, in the Q2 report, BEEP was actually the only cost center, I think, that was running a deficit on expenses. So it's not clear to me what the impact, and we just raised their fee, which means they're, need to be keeping up. So it's not entirely clear to me what the impact of that 1.2 coming out of their reserves means. And I don't know if there's any relationship to this and what making their classes smaller, or if what consolidate means. Does it mean changing locations? Like
Linus or
closing?
Susan, can you answer this? Thank you, Linus.
So it's looking at, and I'll get Margaret to fan this out for me a little bit more and give greater detail tomorrow, but it's looking at truly a consolidation of some classes right now that have added capacity or typically run much lower. I know the pre-K, the preschool classes are, those classes evolve over the course of the year. But also some of the, one of the other classes, and I think it's looking really at the Driscoll, looking at two sites, looking at Driscoll and looking at the Putterham location, I think is where Margaret is thinking about this, but I'll get a deeper detail for that for tomorrow night.
Thank
It
you.
would be really nice to know if you're speaking with Margaret, if there's anybody who's going to leave that position this year anyway, so that maybe we wouldn't have to eliminate anybody's position in the consolidation. I would really love to know that to be decided FTE, if you pretty much know that you're going to lose some current teachers.
Thank you, Sarah. Other comments from the subcommittee on how they want to proceed, or things that they feel, maybe perhaps other things that they would feel comfortable adding to the list that I've proposed, or they would feel uncomfortable and want to remove from the list? Helen, you're
Well,
not on the
I just-
subcommittee, so I'm gonna go ahead and make a quick comment, or you took your hand down, even better. Okay, go ahead, Sarah.
I would like to address line item 13 for a little while to hear what my colleagues feel about that. Sometimes when we make a cut, we don't get great savings out of it because we have to figure out how the task will be approached elsewhere. So if we restructure teaching and learning K-8 curriculum coordinators, and we go from having 4.8 positions to having 2.0, I'd like to hear from Jody, what that means. Maybe Jody was going to talk about this tomorrow night anyway, so I'd be willing to hold off. But I'd like to know what that means. Like, does that mean that there would be somebody who is well-versed in all 4 subjects? Or would the new people, I don't know, be STEM oriented? What's the expectation there?
I think we heard a little bit about that from Jody at the original presentation, but Jody, if I think you're here, I'm sorry, I can't see all the people, but if you are here, Jody, is she? She was
Yes, I'm
earlier.
here.
Okay, Jody, do you mind just if your thinking has whatever has evolved, or over the past couple weeks, that would be great to hear.
I think this would be a very difficult, sorry, looking at the wrong screen. I think this would be a very difficult cut and change for us to make at the middle school level. The specific teachers, and finding that unicorn generalist would be very difficult. However, I think there's creative ways that we could work around that. That might require some negotiations with our teachers union to have a lead teacher for each subject area. Lots of districts have the director of elementary ed model, which is I feel a really strong model. We would lose some evaluation ability that these positions provide. They really focus, I think, on the middle school level subject-specific areas and release some of the evaluation load from our school principals. So this isn't an easy cut to suggest, but it's one that I think, though difficult, could be workable.
So our principals, we're pretty sure that our principals would have a heavier evaluation load with.
They definitely would, because
Okay.
they'd be losing 2 evaluators.
And to go back to, Mariah did say that you spoke about this before. So if it were 2 positions, one K-8, one K-5, the other 6 to 8, my question that I didn't ask very well before that I want to know is, that person would still try to support curriculum in the 5 different curriculum areas. So they would have to be a person who's versed in I mean, that's what you're saying is difficult about this cut, is like that it just doesn't, it doesn't quite make sense somehow. And you know, it's not a large savings to us. So if we stipended teacher leaders, can you give us an idea, like, is it still a $415,000 savings?
No, it's actually a little bit less than that. Because we'd be adding the 2 positions in, we'd only be cutting 2.8. So I think that number is a little high, Mariah. I could be wrong about that. I don't have the sheet open in front of me.
That was the original number presented to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then that's the right one.
Okay.
So I do think that we would be switching more to a focus on middle school pedagogy rather than subject area expertise, which would be a change and could have a long-term impact on our test scores.
And how about differentiation? Are the curriculum coordinators, is that something that's expected to come from them?
They do help advise our curriculum coordinators are wonderful, so this is difficult for me to talk about. And they do advise our teachers on how to reach all students. They consult with teachers when teachers are having a difficult time with that in their subject area and in their classroom.
Carolyn? And I just want to highlight, we're at 7:22. It's almost an hour over, which we knew we were going to be late because of this one, but just to keep an eye on the clock.
Apologies if this has been asked before. And again, if we had an org chart, I wouldn't have to be asking this question. Jody, can you just very briefly, how many curriculum coordinators not their names, what are the positions now? And do we still have a world language person working full-time as a curriculum coordinator for what's now 6 through 8, or does that individual, what does that position look like now? Thanks.
You're welcome. That individual right now, because of the nature of world language, and we tried to explore doing this for all of our curriculum coordinators, is a 0.8 coordinator and teaches 0.2 of their time. We would be losing our K-8 math curriculum coordinator, our K-8 literacy curriculum coordinator, our K-8 social studies coordinator, and our, who did I forget? K-8 science coordinator. Did I answer all your questions, Carolyn?
You did, exactly. Thank you. And I guess I'd have to say at this time, I would redline this. That's where I'm leaning. I don't know what other people are thinking.
I think given the time, I'm going to propose that we essentially take the easy greens that I mentioned before and call the night a night. So I'm going to move that we accept the 990 row. Betsy, do you mind moving the menu over on the left so I can see the numbers?
Yes, I was going to say, if you could give me
Thank
the
you.
item numbers, then I'll have the
Thank
motion.
you. Yep. So I'm going to move item 1, 3, 7, and I think that's it right now. That's what I agreed on before, right? 1, 3, and 7. Did I miss anything? So that would be 991 plus
Are you
100.
sure you don't want to do 9 too, Mariah?
I personally do want to do 9, so I'll can I get a sense of the committee before I add it on there? Would you support adding 9 for now? Sarah, Val, Carolyn?
So that's related to the list that we got.
That we got earlier. Exactly, that list. Thank you, Betsy.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but I feel like I would need more time to just
that's fine.
Go through this.
Yeah, that's
Thanks.
fine. And originally it wasn't on here for a reason. So
okay.
Yep. So I'm going to make the motion to accept 1, 3, and 7 for now. If there's a second. Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Val, how do you vote?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Carolyn,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, so I think that that's the last thing on our agenda for tonight. And I think that we will then go into tomorrow night, and that will be those two votes will be our recommendation to full school committee. And of course, we will be receiving additional information tomorrow night. We'll have more information, or I'm sorry, more time to process some of the information we received tonight. But this will give us a basis from which to continue the conversation at tomorrow night's meeting. And I want to say thank you so much to the multiple staff who have stuck with us through this long, long meeting, and to the committee members who've all been here. Much appreciation. And of course, to all of our colleagues on advisory committee and all of the public as well who has been with us through this. So thank you, and we will continue this tomorrow evening.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.